Hello, my name is Jesselyn Dalby, and I will be reflecting on a professional presentation that I did for EDU 433, Reflective Practice Teaching Reading. So the first question is, what professional knowledge did I gain? I gained knowledge and experience on collaboration with peers, other teachers. This experience showed me that collaborating on a presentation takes time and effort, and you can't just throw it together without getting together with your group and talking about it. I also learned how and when it is appropriate to do a seated presentation at a table rather than speaking at the front of a group. I learned that if you have a small group of people that you're presenting to, then you should sit down and do a seated presentation. And if you're doing a large presentation in front of a big group of people, then it's best to stand up and present. I also learned at the Q&A session after the presentation that although that was a large group of people, it was appropriate at that time to be seated to answer their questions because it made it more friendly, and it was unplanned answers to the questions, and so that at that point it was appropriate to be seated. I also was learning professionally about being aware of generational differences in audience members and myself as a presenter. I had an audience that was of a generation that is older than I am, and so choosing my words carefully was very important so that I would not be disrespectful or seem that it was strange at all, because it was interesting to see the difference in the way that my presentation was received from the older generation audience members than a younger generation. Especially, I'm used to presenting towards kids, and they are a little bit more receptive to things that I have to say. And when I was presenting to the audience members that were older than me, I had to be much more careful in my word choice. I also learned that I should carefully look over expectations and requirements for presentations. Some presentations require that you provide a handout or some physical manifestation of notes for the audience members, and I failed to look at that part of the requirements, and so I did not have that part of the presentation for my audience members, and it surely would have made the presentation better. I also learned that when collaborating, we need to make sure that everyone is on the same page and is prepared to do the type of presentation that we were expecting to do. Some of my group members were confused about the topic, and I didn't realize this until we began presenting, and I felt like I had to fill in some of the blanks. But that's okay. That's what teaching's all about. So the main thing on that point is to make sure that my collaborators are also on the same page as me and knowing what we will be presenting. Another thing I need to explain about what I learned about my professional knowledge is that I should not repeat myself, but rather I should try to think of ways to rephrase the same thing using different words. So I need to say things in different ways rather than using the exact same words to get my point across. The second topic I will reflect upon is how I will use what I learned in my future teaching. The main part that I will use in my future teaching is the topic, which was multimodal literacy, and that is using different modes of text such as video, image, and music to teach literacy, where you go through the text and stop at strategic points, just as you would when reading a book. And my favorite modes of literacy are music and images. I tend to see a lot of video use in classrooms, and so I would like to use music and images more as a text than videos for that different mode of literacy. especially music. I also need to be aware of when teaching at the front of the classroom is appropriate and when sitting down to teach a small group is appropriate, similar to what I learned with my present professionalism. It might be a little easier to see in a classroom when it is appropriate to stand and when to sit, but this was definitely a learning experience that I will take to my future teaching and read the room to see when it is appropriate to stand at the front of the classroom and when it is appropriate to sit down with a small group to teach. I will also take to my future teaching the knowledge I gained on collaboration with co-teachers. To communicate the important parts of the lesson is very important, and perhaps having a meeting or two before the lesson is taught, even just a quick discussion at the beginning to make sure that all the teachers are on the same page would be beneficial for the lesson. I want to look for other ways to incorporate multimodal literacy into different subjects, just like the teacher, Mrs. Walter, whom we interviewed for this presentation, uses music for her social studies and math classes. I also want to reflect upon what I will use for future teaching as far as time management goes. The first presentation we did, because we did two, the first presentation of this topic was quite a bit longer than the second presentation. The first presentation took about 20 minutes and included time at the end for the audience members to participate in an interactive activity. And the second presentation, our audience members had only 10 minutes before they had to go to another class. So that time, we had to speed through our presentation, leaving out several details. And this taught me that the same lesson could be taught either fast, with less attention to detail, or slow, with going into much detail. And I believe that the students who had to go right away after the presentation, the ones that only got a 10-minute presentation, they still got a general idea of what multimodal literacy was, but they would have benefited greatly from a handout, like I mentioned earlier, I should have included with my presentation. Finally, what did I learn about myself as a professional educator? I learned that I am very passionate about art and especially music integration in the classroom. I really want to incorporate music into as many subjects as I can when I go into teaching. I also learned about myself that I am capable of adapting a lesson to fit the needs of students and time frames. Like I mentioned recently about the quick lesson that was chopped short from 20 minutes to 10 minutes, I was able to get across my main points without losing the meaning of the presentation, although I had to leave out some details. So that's a good thing that I learned about myself as a teacher. I also learned that I need to work on rephrasing instead of repeating. So this will take some practice, as I notice that I tend to say the same things over and over again when I'm trying to make a point. I also need to work on talking more with my hands rather than putting them behind my back or clasping them in front of myself. If I am more expressive with my hands, I will be able to get my point across more clearly and more exciting for the audience members. I also need to work on not creating a barrier between myself and the audience, such as standing behind a desk or behind a computer or behind a chair even. Creating that wall between me and my audience makes it harder for them to connect with me. I also need to notice when it is appropriate to stand and when to sit, as I have mentioned earlier. The presentation we did, we were standing when we should have been sitting. It would have been much more relaxed. I also learned that I need to become more prepared with notes or handouts when necessary for lessons and presentations. Overall, this presentation experience was beneficial to me as a teacher, and this class has been very helpful as well in helping me to reflect upon my professionalism and my teaching. Thank you for watching.